And this week, Parashat Tzav, the second parasha in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, which we began last week. The first half of Parashat Tzav continues the discussion of the korbanot, the offerings in the Mishkan and later in the temple. Parashat Tzav focuses specifically on the practical service of the kohanim. Tzav et Aharon ve'et banav le'emor. Command Aharon and his sons. These instructions are directed to Aharon and his actual sons and all kohanim for generations thereafter. Parashat Tzav lays out the practical laws and daily routines of the offerings and is almost like a professional manual for the temple staff, kohanim working in the Mishkan, and later in Bet HaMikdash. Velavash hakohen mido vad umichnasei vad ilvash al bsaro. Mido, his size, like the word midah, measurement. The Kohen's garments were not offered in one size fits all, and were tailored to the measurements of each Kohen. They could not be too long, dragging on the floor or past one's fingers, or too short. As we discussed previously in Parashat Tzav, the Torah defines the clothing of the Kohen lechavod uletiferet, for honor and for beauty, or splendor. Clothing that doesn't fit properly is not fitting for the dignity and holiness of the temple. And in addition to the practical and psychological implications of having well-fitting clothing, if the garment was too loose or too long, it could create a chatzitza, an interruption, between the Kohen and the service, and it would disqualify the work of the Kohen. And clothing is mentioned again in the next verse, in connection with the first action of the day, the removal of the ashes, hotzaat hadeshen. There was a special procedure for removing the ashes from the altar. Ufashatet b'gadav velavash b'gadim acherim vehotzi et hadeshen. He shall remove his garments, wear the other garments, and take the ashes outside. The initial removal of the ashes from the altar itself is done in sacred garments. The Kohen then changes into different garments and removes the ashes outside of the camp. And why change clothing? It seems to make sense. The removal of ashes is dirty work, and to keep the Kohen's clothing looking clean while performing other services in the Mishkan, the Kohen's clothing must be changed. Rashi explains this with an analogy that is very visual. Rashi says, the clothing worn by a person performing a service of cooking is different from the clothing worn by a person who is pouring their master a glass of wine. Or, in our terms, the kitchen staff dress differently from the sommelier, the person pouring the wine. And regarding the work on the altar, Esh tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tichbe. Constant fire shall burn upon the altar, it shall not go out. The fire on the mizbeach burned continuously, the kohanim adding wood daily and maintaining a constant flame. This holy fire required ongoing human effort, and the word tamid, always, is fundamental. Serving Hashem is not a one-time moment, it's a continuous state of being. Spiritually and outside the walls of the Mishkan or the temple, we each have an inner fire, which requires daily effort, renewal, and physical action in our world. Through Torah, Avodah, prayer, and Gmilut Chasadim, daily, we are called to keep that fire alive. And what is the Kohen's first offering? Ze korban Aharon uvanav beyom himashech oto. This is the offering of Aharon and his sons on the day he is anointed. On the first day of service, a Kohen brings a korban chinuch, an initiation offering. Chinuch, like chanicha, initiation. Chinuch also means education, the beginning of a habit and entering a sacred role. This korban is brought only once by a Kohen throughout their lifetime, and it is made of a mixture of flour and oil. And did you know that many young children begin their journey of chinuch, education, in Torah, specifically with the book of Vayikra, which focuses primarily on the sacrifices, the work of the kohanim, and all things associated with purity and impurity. But wouldn't it be easier to teach children a story-like narrative? The Midrash teaches, let the pure children who have not yet sinned engage in the matters of purity, the korbanot, and service of the kohanim. And we return to the parasha with the laws of korban mincha, chatat, asham, shlamim. These offerings are shared with the kohanim, but some parts of the korban are put entirely on the altar, the mizbeach, and never consumed. Kol chelev, shor, vakesev, vaez, lo tochelu. Chelev refers to specific internal fats around the kidneys, stomach, and inner organs of ox, sheep, or goats. All kosher animals. The chelev is designated specifically for the mizbeach and is forbidden for consumption. Like the chelev, other organs located in the rear half of the animal are not kosher and forbidden for consumption, and many communities avoid eating the rear part of the animal entirely. And more on the topic of kosher, וכל דם לא תאכלו בכל מושבותיכם לעוף ולבהמה. You shall not consume any blood, whether bird or animal. Making an animal kosher after proper shchita, kosher slaughtering, requires washing, salting, and rinsing. And before kosher meat was readily available on the supermarket shelves, people would kosher their meat at home by sprinkling coarse salt on the meat, which drew out the blood from the animal. And for this reason, coarse salt is widely known as kosher salt throughout the United States. Not because the salt itself is kosher, all natural salt is kosher, but because the salt is used for koshering or koshering. One of those koshering requirements is drawing out the blood. And kosher affects dishes and utensils too. V'kli cheres asher tevushal bo yishaver. An earthenware vessel or clay pot of sorts in which a korban chatat was cooked, or if a korban remained in the vessel after it was allowed to be consumed, the clay pot must be broken. It cannot be made kosher again. The clay absorbs the flavor and the essence of the food which was cooked in it. Ve'im beklin choshet, a copper vessel, can be purified. This becomes central in Pesach preparation. Some dishes and utensils may be made kosher for Passover, like silverware and other items made of metal. But earthenware, ceramics, cannot be made kosher for Passover if they were already touched by chametz. And no, you don't need to break them, but they should be stored separately in a sealed cabinet throughout Passover. And if this scene doesn't look familiar to you, come visit Jerusalem. On the days leading up to Passover, Pesach, people bring all of the items which can be made kosher for Passover, and these are dunked in vats of boiling water and then cold water, or fired directly with a blowtorch. It's all very exciting. Now back to korbanot. וזאת תורת זבח השלמים אם על תודה יקריבנו. This is the law of the peace offering, if he brings it as a thanksgiving offering. Todah, thanks, gratitude. This offering is brought after a significant salvation. Tehillim Kuf Zayin describes 4 such scenarios: a person who has returned from dangerous journey by sea or by desert, one who was healed from a significant illness, or was released from imprisonment. But fundamentally, anyone can bring a Korban Todah to express gratitude. And alongside the animal offering, it includes a whopping 40 loaves of bread, 4 different types of bread, 3 non-chametz and 1 chametz, and 10 loaves of each type of bread. And if, like me, you're trying to use up all your chametz before Passover, here are some recipe ideas directly from the Torah. The ingredients are all basic, but the cooking methods vary. The first method is classic baking. There is a thick oily dough, chalot matzot blulot b'shemen, and rikikei matzot meshuchim b'shemen. Thinly rolled dough brushed with olive oil after it's shaped, like a cracker. The next method is frying in a deep, shallow pan, machvat u'marcheshet. And there is the minchat chavitin, or mincha morvechet. It's a triple cooked masterpiece. First, the dough is boiled like a New York bagel, followed by baking and then frying. And finally, it is broken up like a crumble and mixed with livona. And the fourth, lechem chametz, a sourdough. This is the exception and the only time that chametz is brought to the Mishkan, the temple. Korban Todah is the only sacrifice which will be renewed in the third temple to come. Even during that time, gratitude to Hashem will always remain a foundational, fundamental part of Judaism, our connection with the Creator and with our own selves. Just like the first words we say every morning, Modeh Ani, grateful I am. Modeh, the same root as Todah, thanks. As we mentioned in the previous parasha, sacrifices were replaced after the destruction of the Second Temple by prayer. It is traditional that when one is grateful for surviving one of the 4 situations described in Kuf Zayin of Tehillim, Psalm 107, that they say Birkat HaGomel, usually performed in a synagogue with a congregation of at least 10 male adults. And the second half of the parasha, Shiv'at Yemei HaMiluim, the 7 days of Miluim. No, not Miluim like reserve duty. Miluim like Maleh, fullness. These days are full of preparation, initiation, and dedication. Moshe builds and dismantles the Mishkan every day and acts as the Kohen Gadol, training Aharon and his sons for their upcoming roles. And the parasha concludes with Vaya'as Aharon uvanav et kol hadvarim asher tziva Hashem. Aharon and his sons did all that Hashem commanded. This Shabbat, when we read Parashat Tzav, is known as Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Shabbat, the Shabbat preceding Seder night, which will take place this year on Wednesday evening. And outside of Israel, many will celebrate a second Seder on the following night, Thursday evening. On the Shabbat of Passover, Chol HaMoed, we do not continue with the regular reading of the Torah portions. Instead, there is a special reading. And so we will meet back here in 2 weeks for Parashat Shmini. And remember, cleaning for Pesach is not spring cleaning. We're removing more than just dust. Chametz, yes, the real, actual carbohydrate leavened bread, and our internal, spiritual chametz. And through it all, Hodu LaHashem ki tov. Praise Hashem, for it is good. Truly. Until next time, Pesach kasher v'sameach, a happy and kosher Pesach, and Shabbat Hagadol, Shalom.